Hello, hello. It's Hidden Hour Saturday night. Used to be a Friday night. Now we do Saturday night. So for those joining us, it's so good to see already so many people here waiting. Thank you for being here. We are going to talk the long-awaited case that everybody's been asking about, KOURI RICHINS. We have been following it. We have been following along and talking to each other. And tonight is the night. Thank you, Blue Sky, for a reminder to like this video. It helps us in the algorithms. Thank you to everyone who congratulated us on our 100,000 subs. Next up, 144,000. And
yeah,
yes. And as
can you
John
explain
said,
why are we trying to get to 144,000?
Well, we are the gatherers of good reasons, of a good community, and we follow the Daybell case. We've been covering the Daybell case for 3 years now, which, by the way, we are replaying all of our original Beyond the Veil series on YouTube right now to celebrate our 3-year birthday and to share what started it all, which is our podcast on Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow will be sentenced at the end of next month. And so if you want to join us live at noon streaming this, you can, noon Pacific, or you can watch the replay or listen to the replay of those podcasts on a playlist. If one of the mods can grab that playlist or show people where that is, I'm doing a replay series. So 144,000, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were the gatherers, or so they thought. They are now sitting behind bars. So that clearly wasn't the case. They weren't the visionaries they thought they were. But we are also gathering, and we are gathering, though, for justice, for hope, for an incredible community of hidden gems. So thank you to everyone for being here.
And don't forget I keep making the promise that we're also gathering for a big pool party at the Bellagio. So
Mick Spunky's reminding everyone right now.
Okay, yeah.
That's all John. So when 144 happens and you guys want your swim party at the Bellagio, look no further than Dr. John here for all planning.
I don't know what the capacity is over there, but I better start looking into it. So I think they can handle, I don't know, 500, maybe 1,000. We'll have to see if they can expand their capacity, but assuming we get there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sparrow, for sharing the Beyond the Veil playlist. And it seemed only right that we would be covering KOURI RICHINS because there's so many similarities. Many of our gems have pointed out between her and Lori and Charles Vallow. We know that Lori, although Charles wasn't murdered with poisoning, Lori's been charged in his murder. She claims self-defense and a shooting death. We do know that she would poison his drinks with medication and others. And it's and this is another husband and wife, and KOURI is charged. KOURI RICHINS is a mother of 3 in Summit County, Utah, Park City area. Last week I said, remember where Gwyneth Paltrow skis. Everyone learned that. Deer Valley area, sort of the similar area, a beautiful, beautiful mountaintop community. And she was married to Eric RICHINS, and Eric RICHINS is now deceased. She is charged. It took a year, but she was charged in his murder, poisoning death. That she, according to the probable cause, she put fentanyl in his Moscow Mule, and so innocent until proven guilty. Of course, she is in custody without bond. And we are fascinated with this case for many reasons, the similarities between Lori Vallow Daybell, but also, as I shared last week, this sort of hit the map because of an interview she did right before her arrest, about a month before her arrest. She had been a grieving, AKA grieving mother at this point. We'll get into that, right, Dr. John? The grieving mother part. She'd been a grieving mother for about a year, and nobody really knew about the investigation. And she appeared as a guest on a morning talk show in Utah. This is my old station, actually. In fact, I'll post a picture later with me and all the women she was sitting down with interviewing, and that were interviewing her. And for this Good Things Utah podcast, where she was promoting a book about grief to help children grieve. I did a little bit of a rundown. Everybody knows with the insomnia crew. Was it a week ago, guys? What day was it that I stayed up all night, John? And then I told you the next day. People are like, how do you do it? I'm like, I don't. I was a wreck the next day.
I think it was Monday night, maybe.
Monday night.
Monday
So
Monday
I gave
or
a little
Tuesday.
bit of I read some court documents there. I read her probable cause. I read the transcription of the body cam footage the night first responders arrived to find Eric Richins deceased. So this is so for anybody else that wants a little bit more of a background, that is a great video to start. And John, do you want me to clarify a little bit about what do you want to start with first? Should I kind of give the background of this interview with ABC4, what I've learned since then?
Let me just, since you mentioned the charges, let me just mention the charges.
Okay.
Because there's one charge I think is actually really interesting, and we'll talk about that later. But the first charge is criminal homicide, aggravated murder. So that's fairly straightforward. She's accused of murdering her husband. And then the next three charges are all substance abuse related. So charge 2 is possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. That was on or about January 2022. The third count is possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute February 11th, 2022. And this is the most interesting one to me. Possession or use of controlled substance, there's no intent to distribute, on or about March 9th, 2022, which was actually 5 days after her husband, Eric, passed away. So one of the curiosities about the probable cause statement is that she obtains fentanyl 5 days after her husband is deceased, and then they charge her with it. So there's a little bit of a mystery here, I think, in terms of what's going on there. Is she getting fentanyl after the fact to use on other people? Why is she getting that fentanyl after her husband's deceased? Like, in theory, the purpose of her obtaining the fentanyl was to kill her husband, right? But
what she used it for, she did use some.
Right, exactly. That he had an overdose from fentanyl, obviously, but here she is 5 days after the fact getting fentanyl. I'm just going to throw it out there because it's a bit of a mystery. We'll talk about this a little later, I think, but we know that she took out life insurance policies on her children. Well, here you have this fentanyl 5 days after the crime. She's charged with it. It's not clear why. I mean, one of the things prosecutors like to do is they like to tack on as many charges as they can in the hopes of maybe getting a plea deal or affecting a plea deal, which that could be part of this, but still, there's a little bit of a mystery here. What was her purpose in getting fentanyl 5 days after the crime? Was it to use on someone else? And who would that have been? Would it have been one of the Richins, one of Eric's siblings? Would it have been the children? Right? It's a really interesting component of this probable cause statement because it doesn't really fit, and they don't tell you why. They give a date when she acquired fentanyl, March 9th. We know that she possessed it, but her husband had been deceased by then. So anyway, I'm throwing that out for people to think about and discuss. We don't have the answer, obviously, but maybe it's something that the prosecution will attempt to answer down the road. I don't know.
Yes. Another interesting tidbit, if we're going down that rabbit hole, you know, there has been a lot of sleuthing into this case. I want to thank many in our community who have helped us, who have shared some interesting tidbits with us. In fact, we even got an email yesterday that I might share some of that without names. But and I want to give a special thank you to Laura Ferris in Utah for all of the documents she's collected as well. We're going to share a lot of those documents shortly on our Facebook page, facebook.com/hiddentruecrime. So head there after the fact. But Laura also sent us her Pinterest account, which some of you have seen, but she was posting. I mean, look, so this is for me. Think what you want of it, make what you want of it. It means it proves nothing. But if we like these details, she was posting a lot of wedding photos on a wedding board, like over 200 of them recently. Not that means anything. I have, John, just for the record, I have posted wedding photos on my Pinterest board since marrying you, and it means nothing. I just thought they were pretty photos, so no worries.
Yeah, I'm gonna look out for a Moscow Mule if you fix one for me. So
right. I have a Moscow Mule board and a wedding board, both going. No, but it doesn't mean anything, but throw that into the mix. It's odd. What were her plans? We don't know. But
if you make me a Moscow Mule later on tonight, I will not drink it, just for the record.
Okay.
Now that I know this information. So
well, I've never made you one before, so it would be awfully
odd. That's true. Yeah. I didn't even know what it was until this week. So you might have been able to get me to drink one before I knew what it was, but now that I know what it is, I don't know. Yes. Maybe at the Bellagio pool party, we'll all get Moscow Mules. How about that?
Yeah. Thank you, Fly Girl and Kim Matheson. I want to bring up what Kim Matheson said. Fentanyl is not evil, but it is evil if it is used in street drugs. It is a terrible, terrible thing. She explains that her sister in stage 4 terminal cancer used it. My brother has been using it right now in the ICU. So that is true, but it should only be used. It can be very lethal. It should only be used under high medical care. And the fact that when it becomes a street drug, it is a very dangerous thing and has taken many lives. But yes, in the right context, that is why we have fentanyl. Teresa, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm so sorry, Kim, for that. All right. I need to make a correction, a very important correction, and I've already seen the questions come up about did she or did she not pay money to be on Good Things Utah. So I did go to my sources and find out more. In the late night insomnia, I shared that it is typical, which it is, to pay to be a sponsor to be on Good Things Utah. So, and so I just assumed that KOURI had paid. She did not. So I will explain Good Things Utah. And this, I've done my research. So a correction, KOURI Richins did not pay to be on Good Things Utah a month before her arrest, but she did reach out to them. So this is a very popular morning talk show in Utah, and it's been going on for 21 seasons. It has not changed. They have 2 separate guests. They have the sponsored guests and they have the creative guests. And they invite them on the show. It's a lot like The View. It's 3 or 4 women that are hosts, and they talk everything in the community. It's not necessarily a news show, but a talk show format. She did write the station and suggested that she be on and asked to be on. She wanted to come into the studio to to share her book about grief. I believe that she shared with the station that she is the only one that she knows that's written a children's book about grief. That's kind of mind-blowing to think about, because I'm sure if you Googled or looked on Amazon, I can only imagine how many books for grief would pop up, I think. But she let them know that as far as she knows, she was the only one. And we also know that she didn't necessarily write the book. It was a ghostwriter and a company that helped her. But she did reach out to Good Things Utah to promote her new children's book about grief. So I hope I've clarified that. She did not pay as a grieving mother. They decided that, gosh, this would make a great creative guest that we can let her promote her book and come into the studio per her request. But she is the one that reached out. I hope that clarifies things. John's like, yeah.
Well, right. We'll talk about this more in a minute, but the fact that she reached out to them is still very attention seeking, in my opinion. I think she's clearly looking to be on a public show to get some attention. I think, she may want to elicit some sympathy actually by being on the show. But we'll get into that in a little more detail when we talk about the interview.
Yes. And we are going to get into the interview a bit.
Yeah. The first thing I want to talk about is people have asked this week, since we're covering this case, is there a psychological profile of someone who poisons someone, or let's call them a poisoner? Is there a psychological profile of a poisoner? And the answer is sort of. It's vague. There's not a lot of research supporting a profile of someone who poisons someone else. But there is some research, and it is interesting. And so I wanted to start with that, and we can think about the typical psychological profile of someone who's a poisoner and maybe how it relates to KOURI RICHINS or doesn't relate. The sources I want to cite here are a book by Michael Farrell, written in 2017. It's called Criminology of Homicidal Poisoning. It's probably the best known textbook at the moment on this topic. There is a forensic psychologist. Her name is Joni Johnston. She's written a number of articles for Psychology Today. She did an interview with A&E a few years ago, fairly recently. She's researched this topic. She's written about it. And lastly, there's a book by John Trestrail called Criminal Poisoning. That's probably the third source that's worthwhile in terms of thinking about a psychological profile. So I'm going to combine some of these sources. If people want to go look individually, you can do that. Some of the elements of a poisoner would include a sense of inadequacy, a strong need for control. They tend to be self-centered and have an exploitive interpersonal style. They often have childhoods where they're extremely spoiled, or they grow up in homes that have trauma.
Or both.
Or both. It could be both, right? It could be both. I'm going to quote, this is an article actually called The Psychological Profile of a Poisoner by Joni Johnston, Psychology Today, 2012. She says, quote, some experts liken the poisoner's personality to an incorrigible child whose immature desire for his or her own way leads him or her to try to control and manipulate the world. It's as if the poisoner never grew up and is determined to take what he or she wants, just as a child would from a candy store. So I think that was an interesting observation, that the word that they're not using, Joni Johnston actually uses it once. She refers to narcissism. But a lot of this description is consistent with narcissistic features. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think the researchers are stopping just shy of using that term because maybe they don't want the association with narcissism, or maybe there's insufficient research to tie in poisoning with narcissistic personality disorder. And I'm certainly not going to go there because I don't know KOURI RICHINS, but the profile essentially is the profile of someone with a lot of narcissistic features. When you refer to someone as an incorrigible child who doesn't get their way and tries to control and manipulate the environment, you're essentially talking about a narcissist. A narcissist would be someone with stunted development, usually someone who has a strong sense of entitlement, someone who lacks empathy, someone with a lot of grandiosity. And those, by the way, are additional traits of this profile that Michael Farrell and Joni Johnson talk about. They also talk about, in the Johnston article, she talks about the two main motives for poisoners in committing murder. The main motive is, wait for it, money.
Okay.
The main motive is money and greed, and typically it involves insurance policies. Does that sound familiar here?
Yes, it does.
And the second motive is jealousy. So some type of a lover's triangle, which actually, if you read, there's an email from KOURI RICHINS that she sent to law enforcement on April 19th, 2023, that we have. She accuses, we don't know if it's true. We haven't fully vetted this, but she accuses Eric of engaging in infidelity and an affair. And so here you have the classic lover's triangle. Was she threatened by this relationship? Did she think that it would lead to divorce? Was she worried that Eric would leave her for someone else and she wouldn't get any money? Right. So jealousy, I think you'd have to say that financial gain would be the primary motive here, but certainly jealousy could play a role in this. Michael Farrell, in his book, identifies three main traits of poisoners. They are greed, that he also thinks that people who poison are remorseless. The lack of remorse would be consistent. It could be consistent with someone with narcissistic personality disorder. It's also a very common trait of psychopaths. He also says that poisoners are cunning and manipulative. I think those two run together. So those are his main observations about offenders who poison.
Okay. Someone's asking, aren't poisoners usually women?
Yeah, you know what? So in terms of overall numbers, more men poison than women. And the reason for that is that more men murder than women. More men are violent and engage in crime than women. So the sheer numbers actually point towards men.
Interesting.
But the percentage, here's where it differentiates. The percentage of women is much higher. When you look at women who commit murder, the percentage who poison is way higher than men. So women engage in more poisoning than men. It's just that in terms of the gross statistics, men poison more because men kill more. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. So women prefer poisoning when they do commit murder, and often the poisoning occurs with a spouse or someone they know. Almost all poisonings, 90+% occur in these types of scenarios where the offender knows the victim, has some relationship with the victim.
It's knowing them. And right, okay. Well, I want to bring something. Keep going, and then this is interesting.
So those are that's just a brief portrait or psychological portrait of someone who would poison. One of the interesting things about this portrait, and Joni Johnston talks about this, is that a lot of poisoners tend to be conflict avoidant. They tend to be less confrontational than most murderers. So a lot of murderers are aggressive and violent, and poisoners tend to be sort of on the other side of that. They're less confrontational, they're less aggressive. And that's interesting to think about in terms of KOURI RICHINS and even Lori Daybell, right? In the sense that Lori Daybell gets Audrey alone and threatens to kill her, essentially, if she says anything. Right. And KOURI RICHINS attacks her sister-in-law, Amy RICHINS, brutally attacks her. By Amy's account, it took 4 people to pull KOURI RICHINS off of her because she was so enraged. So KOURI RICHINS doesn't really seem to fit a typical profile here in terms of someone who's conflict avoidant. I'm not saying that she's seeking out conflict, but you and I have also talked to a source this week who said that there might be some history of bullying where she's the bully, not the bullied, but she's actually doing the bullying, and that happened when she was younger. So She tends to be a little more confrontational than kind of the typical profile. And this, by the way, gets into some of the limitations of psychological profiles. There's no profile that fits everyone. There's no profiles are in general, they tend to be vague no matter what. I think I like how there's a psychologist named Peter Langman who's done a lot of great research on school shooters. And Peter Langman always says, I'm not interested in a profile, I'm interested in patterns. That typically school shooters show certain patterns of behavior and patterns of personality, and he prefers that rather than saying, this is a profile, this is how things are, these are the traits that fit this type of person. Because I think a pattern is it's broader, and it allows for more adaptation, right? It allows for, it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit more appropriate or more useful to think of patterns as they apply to people rather than a specific profile. So I think the overall pattern here, with the exception of being conflict avoidant, if we call it that, the pattern is, to me, it seems, from what I know of KOURI Richins, and again, I've never met her or sat in a room with her and done an interview or testing, but it does seem that some of these qualities do apply to her.
Right. Didn't you also say there's another reason for poisoning of women, or that women that poison, which is abuse? Not that we're putting her in that category, but that's common, right? I guess I just want to point out there's Goodbye Earl or there's KOURI Richins. I'm just saying, like, I just think that is part.
Well, the number one motive for poisoning a spouse is money.
Okay.
But however, that women in general, women who commit suicide in general, and women who commit suicide within marriages or significant relationships, there is a class of women in that category who are essentially engaging in reactive violence. In other words, they're in abusive relationships and they're responding to the abuse with violence let's call it as a type of self-defense.
Okay.
So which is an interesting point, because it raises the question about whether KOURI Richins would go down that road. If she feels like the evidence is overwhelmingly against her, and that there's no way she can shake this poisoning accusation, then maybe she goes to that. Maybe she says that Eric was abusive and she poisoned him because she was afraid for her life or something like that. I mean, I think that's going to be hard to sell, because when the first officer arrives and we have the body cam transcript, the officer asks if everything's okay, and she says it's fine. She doesn't indicate that there's anything wrong at all in their marriage or with Eric's health, or that there's been any type of abuse, or that he harmed her in any way or attacked her, right? There's never been, as far as we know, there's never been any accusations of that. So I think if she's going to pull that out of her hat at the last minute, it's going to be a little suspicious. But it is a common accusation in these types of scenarios where a spouse is deceased, and I shouldn't say an accusation, that in many cases where there is domestic abuse, there is reactive violence, where the spouse does resort to violence to protect themselves. So, and sometimes that leads to homicide.
Okay.
So I think it's interesting here in the sense that we haven't seen any indication at all that Eric was abusive, but I'm wondering if, as a defense strategy, that's something that might come up later.
Right, because it's such a common.
Right, because it's for women who murder their spouses, that is the most typical reason why.
Right.
Because they're in an abusive relationship and they see it as a form of protection or self-defense.
Gotcha. Yeah. Right. So she might attempt, but good luck. Because so far, we, as you know, the sleuthing community, the hidden true crime community, has not uncovered any, substantial evidence of that. So we'll see. I've talked to people that knew her and him, Eric and KOURI, excuse me, and they're shocked. They did not see any red flags in the family system. And then, I mean, that's not everyone. I know that there are some people that did. And there's also someone that has mentioned to us that KOURI was, as John mentioned already, a bully in junior high or high school time, that she was a bully. So, which I know you already mentioned. We have some new people here, including Laura Ferris, someone who's helped us with a lot of research. Thanks, Laura.
Right. And in fact, I would argue, you could argue that if there is some type of revenge, and so if you see a victim of domestic violence responding in an aggressive manner, you can see that as maybe a type of revenge for all the pain that was inflicted upon them. I would actually argue that KOURI RICHINS has more motives for revenge in terms of, right, the affair we don't know, but the affair.
There's no evidence of that yet. So
yeah, we don't. Right, the alleged affair that Eric had, maybe.
Right, and she also had an alleged affair, but yeah.
Right. Right. So, exactly.
And a wedding board on Pinterest.
So this issue of, so I started with I'll still call it, even though I just argued for patterns over profiles, I'll just call it the profile. One of the first things I said was that poisoners have a deep sense of inadequacy. And I want to read, this is from an email that was written by KOURI RICHINS to law enforcement on April 19th, 2023. So not that long ago, several months ago, actually. Here's one of the things she says in this email. She says, "Yes, Eric made more money than me. Do you make more money than your wives? Have I ever been financially reliant on Eric in the last 5 years? ? Absolutely not." That's a strange thing to write to law enforcement. First of all, right, it's very defensive.
It's very defensive.
It's extremely defensive. Like, she's threatened by the fact that, not only is she threatened by the fact that Eric makes more money than she does, but she's saying, well, how many of you detectives make more money than your wives, right? Like, that is not something I would write in an email to law enforcement if I knew they were investigating me for murder.
Right.
So there's some anger, right? There's some anger in there, in the sense that she feels as if somehow there's this accusation about Eric making more money than her and supporting her. And we know now that she was stealing from him, right? And so she's very upset about this, and she feels a deep sense of inadequacy here. She feels a lot of shame, I think, in the sense that she sees herself as being on a par with Eric, knowing, of course, that she's been stealing from him, and that that she's not making as much money as he is. But it's a peculiar thing to put in an email to law enforcement.
Someone's asking why she's writing law enforcement. It's because there was an investigation going on for a year that it wasn't in the media, or because we didn't know about it. It surely would have been if people understood, or if his family probably came forward. But there was an investigation going on that the public really wasn't privy to or aware of.
Yeah, here's the short answer. The law enforcement had asked her some questions, and apparently they provided her a list of items that they wanted her to address. And she said, "Hey there," this is how she starts her email. She says, "Hey there, I thought I would clarify some items on your list that you spoke to blank about," redacted. We don't know who blank is, but so she's writing to clarify some issues some questions that law enforcement had. She has some other, there's a lot of interesting things in this email, by the way, but
feel free to read some of it. I did not read this letter on the live I did a couple nights ago. You don't have to read the whole thing, but please read some of it. It is interesting.
And more on this issue of feeling inadequate, or almost kind of this childish sense of entitlement and maybe even independence. I'll read a little bit more. She says here, quote, Eric wanted us to live the typical conservative life where the man takes care of his family and the wife is a homemaker, wife, mom, and that's it. She says, that is not my personality and not the way I was raised. I am very independent. Even when I stayed home with my kids the first few years, I was in grad school for years because I wanted to be more and do more than be a homemaker, and I did. And when I did and started my business, it took some adjusting, but Eric and I were fine with it. So again, she's intent upon selling this image to law enforcement of how independent she is, how she doesn't need Eric for money, how she's so successful. She goes to graduate school, I guess. I'm not sure if she graduated. I'm not sure what she went to graduate school for, but she says she started her business.
I know this wasn't even a question they were asking her. She was offering this. Make no mistake, I'm an independent woman.
Right.
Hear me roar. Yeah, it's very odd.
Which very clearly we know she wasn't, because she had huge amounts of debt. She was stealing money from Eric. Everything she says here is false.
Right.
In the sense that she's not independent. She's totally dependent upon for money and support to the point where she's stealing. She starts a business that's unsuccessful, that has a lot of debt. Like she's clearly trying to create a favorable impression here for law enforcement, as if law enforcement doesn't know, right?
Right.
Law enforcement already knows that this is all false. So I'm sure when it comes time for the trial, this email is going to be a part of it in one form or another.
Right. Some people are saying, oh yeah, read the email. You did read some of it. That was an important part of it. How defensive she was. Also because money is a motive. If she was in debt and and police knew all of this, then there's a motive. So her being so defensive in this area, saying, I didn't need his money. I didn't want his money. I'm an independent woman. And by saying this, she's clearly telling us how actually insecure she is about it.
Right. She's pointing out some of the narcissistic features I mentioned earlier. She's showing us some of those features directly. She says, there's another line from the email. She says, no, Eric and I'm sorry, let me go. She says, no, Eric and I did not have financial problems ever.
Ever.
Right. So
when someone says ever, be very suspicious.
Right. Yeah. Little hint, don't put ever in an email when you're trying to sell somebody on something you're writing. So it doesn't work very well. It certainly didn't age well.
No, it didn't.
So in looking at the patterns or profile of a poisoner, it's interesting to see some of this and to think about the fact or the possible fact that KOURI RICHINS does seem to have some underlying narcissistic features. I'm not saying she's a narcissist, but she does seem to be very insecure. She has a sense of inadequacy. She has a sense of entitlement. She feels like she can steal his money with no problem or impunity, and that he shouldn't care because she deserves it. So anyway.
And people are asking, yes, she had a real estate business that flipped houses. She did this without telling him a lot of what she was doing. People are pointing out that she was taking out loans, and this is what we're referring to. Some people don't know, but there was a motive here with money. Yes.
Right. She had a cleaning business and a real estate business. She was trying to flip homes, but she was not doing so in a timely manner. So she kept taking out hard money loans, and she was getting behind on those. Hard money lenders tend to have higher interest rates, so they're harder to keep up with, especially if you're not making money from the homes that you're buying and flipping. So it seems like she got behind the curve. She was taking out loans. She was getting into debt. She wasn't able to pay back the loans. The interest rates were high. So she started stealing from Eric, essentially, to try to cover her dets. And because I think because she didn't want to be ashamed. I think shame's a part of this. She doesn't want to be exposed as someone who's not this independent, successful woman that she talks about in the email.
Right.
So I think we're also looking at a lot of shame here. She's got this. She's trying to portray her public persona, at least, as this. She's a successful businesswoman. She's independent. She tells law enforcement she doesn't need her husband. She's doing fine, thank you. Right. So I think,
which is also a strange thing for a grieving wife to say too. Think about that too. Like, I would, the first thing that would come to my mind if I lost my soulmate wouldn't be, I didn't need him. Look at me roar.
yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. So anyway, I think that's a good introduction. I think the main things I want to look at with KOURI Richins and the things that really make this case stand out are the book and the interview on your previous station that you worked for. So yes. Why don't let's get into the interview a little bit.
Okay. And I want to let you know, John, I do have the questions pulled up. We did look at all of your questions from our community post. There were some great ones, and a request from Judy with a very generous donation to talk about the prenup a little bit. We don't need to do that now, but I just wanted to throw that out there, that the prenup has been requested, because we were like iffy on the prenup. So we're going to talk prenup. CC, thank you for sharing the link to merchandise, and thank you everyone for the likes you are giving us tonight. Thank you. And I am watching the chat. All right. Yeah. What do you want to do? Do you want to start with that interview? Do you want me to share part of that?
Yeah, let's get into the interview, because the interview is going to give us a lot of information. I think in a way there's a moment in this interview that's extremely revealing, and there's a moment in the email that I'll read after we talk about that moment that confirms that same impression. So
time for Dr. J to show us what's hidden, to expose what's hidden with KOURI Richins. All right. Okay. Well, we will play a part of this interview. I have the link to the full interview in the description of this video. You can find the full interview on ABC4 Utah's website. And if anybody's interested, you can head to that link. I'm going to play a bit of this now, though. John, if you wouldn't mind, or I'll do it. I'm going to put you on mute while I pull this up.
Okay.
No matter if it's a parent, a sibling, or a friend, talking about loss with kids can be a tricky subject. Joining us now is author of Are You With Me? KOURI Richins, to share her 3 C's to helping kids cope with grief. And KOURI, I want to start with your story. What happened in your personal life?
So my husband passed away unexpectedly last year. So it's March 4th was a 1-year anniversary for us. And he was 39. It completely took us all by shock. And we have 3 little boys, 10, 9, and 6. And, my kids and I kind of wrote this book on the different emotions and grieving processes that we've experienced last year. And, hoping that it can kind of help other kids, deal with this and kind of, find happiness some way or another.
Sorry, everyone. Let's try that again. I apologize, everyone. It somehow clicked off. I clicked on chat and it clicked off. So we're gonna let's try that again. Here I go.
I'm gonna jump on here. I want to pause for a moment there.
It was meant to be. My mistake. It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. So there's a couple moments in there I want to talk about. This is the first one. So she says, you just heard it there. She says, I want to help kids deal with this to find happiness. That's a really peculiar statement when you're talking about grief. I get that the idea of coping with grief or mourning or somehow dealing with sadness, but that's quite different than happiness. So
Right.
this is a year on from when her husband passed away. And she's saying that the purpose of her book is to find happiness. I mean, I don't think she's talking about her kids here. I don't think she's talking about grief. I think she's talking about herself.
C-Star says, my kid lost their father. She's offensive. It's a lifelong journey of grief. We agree. Absolutely.
Exactly. And so to start talking about finding happiness after a year, it is a lifelong process. And we'll talk about the book in a minute and why the book is in many ways, in my opinion, an avoidance of grief. But this is a moment here, I think this is a slip where she's saying that the goal is to find happiness. There's nothing about grief and losing your father that's going to be happy. And so to use that term is so peculiar. The question I have is she talking about herself? There's rumors that she was still involved with someone from high school, and that I haven't confirmed all of that, but and we don't like to speculate too much, but this is speculation. But so the idea that perhaps she's looking for some type of happiness that she didn't have in her marriage, that may have been a part of the alleged murder.
Mm-hmm.
And let me say now, by the way, that obviously she's innocent until proven guilty. This is all speculation. We don't know. There's been no trial. So at the moment, obviously, she's innocent until proven guilty. But I think that this is a bit of a projection in the sense that she's thinking about her own future, and she's thinking about her own happiness and what would that look like. And obviously, in her mind's eye, at least, I think that future looks like a life without her husband or her deceased husband. So this is a really interesting moment because in no way do I associate grief with happiness. In fact, quite the opposite, right? The grief is about sorrow and loss and pain and sadness. And KOURI Richins doesn't seem to have a lot of those qualities, by the way.
Right.
So,
yeah. And we're going to keep playing this. I want to bring up a couple things that Good for Utah host did mention. I did check in with my old station, and then they were on national news, and Saray was on News Nation with Ashley Banfield. And these are the things they pointed out. They thought it was strange that she didn't take her jacket off. And I want to say that I do too. Again, this is a talk show format, much like The View, and fashion is a big part of this talk show. Oddly, it's a lot of, most of the viewers are women. They talk about fashion and a lot of, I don't know, but fashion is a big part of, think again, The View, this talk show. So for KOURI to be someone that seems to be into fashion herself or the way she looks, it's strange. She's not taking her jacket off. And then people are bringing up her use of John. You and I haven't talked about that. I don't know if that means anything, but she always is saying that's been brought up multiple times. And the other thing that the host noticed was, and they did notice, it wasn't even hindsight. They noticed it during the show that they said that she was emotionless. She didn't have a lot of emotion. Their reaction to it was, well, who's to say how someone grieves? And they also pointed out, well, it's been a year. Thank you, Laura. The View, current trends. Thank you. I had a loss for words. That's what I was trying to say. That's why fashion is involved. It's current trends. And so one thing that they noted with her that day was, this is odd. She doesn't have a lot of emotion. And then they chalked it up to, well, it's been a year and everyone grieves differently. And who are you to say how someone should grieve? So I just want to lay that out. And again, that came late. I need to correct myself. She did not pay to be on this, but she did reach out requesting to be a creative guest to promote her book. They allowed her to be a creative guest for free as a grieving mother.
So this part about happiness is odd. It's peculiar for someone dealing with grief or writing a book about grief. But the next part is even more revealing. And this next part, I think, really gets to the heart of what we're going to talk about tonight. So
okay, I'll try not to hit the wrong thing this time.
Let's take a listen to that.
Okay. There might be a little bit of rewind, trying to get to the right spot. Make sure I'm in the right spot. Okay, John?
Completely took us all by shock. And we have 3 little boys, 10, 9, and 6. And, my kids and I kind of wrote this book on the different emotions and grieving processes that we've experienced last year. And, hoping that it can kind of help other kids, deal with this and kind of, find happiness some way or another.
And to make sense and process, I'm sure. And I'm sure you felt that going through and trying to explain it and articulate it for you and your boys.
Yes, exactly. And so I've done, I'm new to all of this. So kind of doing, research and reading books and things to try and understand, not only how to grieve as a widow, as a wife, but also, with my kids, how to help them understand what just happened. And what I have kind of found is, as I mentioned, it's kind of the 3 C's is how I visualize it. And it's,
okay. Go ahead, babe.
All right. So I don't know if people caught that, but it took me a couple of listens to really grasp what she just said there. But is my mic on?
Yes.
Okay. But let me repeat what she just said, because this is a really important moment in understanding KOURI Richins. She said, I'm paraphrasing a little bit because she didn't say it exactly like this, but here's what she said. She said, I've been researching and reading books to try to understand how to grieve as a widow and a wife. Let me repeat that. Said, I'm researching and reading books to try to understand how to grieve as a widow and a wife. What? What she just said there is she hasn't grieved. What she just said there is not only has she not grieved, but she doesn't know how to grieve. She is reading and researching to try to understand how to grieve. This has been a year later and there's no grief because she doesn't understand grief. And so you could say, on the one hand, that this lack of emotion and this lack of sorrow, maybe she doesn't do well with sadness or sorrow. And that, by the way, is
probably doesn't. She probably doesn't.
That, by the way, is a possible marker of a psychopath. Psychopaths, we've talked about this numerous times, but psychopaths do not do well with what we call, psychologists call distress emotions. The distress emotions are fear and sadness. So when other human beings experience fear or sadness, the typical human response is to try to help them, to try to reach out to them, to comfort them. Psychopaths, they don't understand. They have no fear. They're fearless. They don't care if someone's experiencing fear. And they have no sadness. They have no sorrow. They don't care if someone's distressed with sorrow. They only care about themselves and getting their needs met. And so I'm not saying that applies to KOURI Richins here, but what I am saying is that this is someone who hasn't grieved. And she sees grief, at least here with her husband, her deceased husband, she sees grief as an intellectual exercise in the sense that she's saying she's researching and reading and trying to understand. This grief is not an emotional process to her. It's purely intellectual. And I'm going to tie this in now with her email. This is the email to law enforcement that I was just reading, April 19th, 2023. Here's what she says, quote, this is towards the end of the email. She says, quote, I just want our lives back and to move on and grieve and mourn my husband without looking over my shoulder constantly for you guys, meaning law enforcement. So let me repeat that. I just want our lives back and to move on and grieve and mourn my husband. So she's saying the same thing. She's saying she has not grieved. This is a woman who twice now in the interview and in the email, she said she hasn't grieved for her husband. So let's break this down. This is really critical. Let's break this down and why this is important.
Okay. Wow.
Why doesn't someone grieve? That's the question. If KOURI Richins has not grieved, which she's telling us she hasn't, why hasn't she grieved? Why doesn't someone grieve? So let's talk about grief in general as a process. That the most intense grief occurs when someone passes unexpectedly. Right? If somebody passes away and you don't expect it, the loss is intense. You feel that intensely because you don't see it coming. And then not only is it unexpected, but there's a deep sense of longing for the person that's gone, right? That a big part of grieving is you want the person back. You miss them. You want them to show up again. I've worked with a lot of people that have experienced, a lot of victims and people that have experienced trauma that are grieving intensely. And one of the things they say all the time is, I just want him or her to come back. I would give anything if they could just walk through the door again and I could just hug them, right? So a big part of grief is not only that it's unexpected, but there's this longing for the other. There's this longing for the deceased to return and to be a part of their lives again. And all of that the fact that a loss is unexpected, that there's this longing, all of that leads to, in many ways, a sense of helplessness, which compounds grief because there's nothing you can do. The loss is in the past. You can't change it. You can't repair it. You can only cope with it. So those are the components, in my opinion, of grief. So let's talk about the components of someone who's not grieving. Right? And this is going to help us understand KOURI Richins. So she's saying she's not grieving, even though her husband's been deceased for years. So the components of someone who wouldn't grieve are that they know the loss is coming. So instead of being unexpected, it's planned, it's expected. Right? They know the loss is coming. You're not going to grieve something if you know something is about to happen or there's some loss on the horizon. The second reason someone wouldn't grieve, given that, is that they're creating the loss. There's no sense of longing because if you murder someone, you're actually responsible for creating that loss. So you don't miss the person. You don't long for them to come back. It's quite the opposite. You actually want them deceased.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. Yes.
And when you take those two, when you take the planning of the loss and the fact that you don't long for the deceased to return, that you actually want them gone, it creates a sense of power and control. As I mentioned at the beginning with our psychological profile, that poisoners have this need for control. They have this need for power. I think you clearly see that here. The reason why KOURI Richins is not grieving is because she's basically telling us that she murdered him.
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that she knows it's coming. She knows that she doesn't want him back, so she doesn't miss him. There's no longing to have him back. She murdered him. And all of that creates this sense of empowerment, the sense of, there's almost, like with this book, she's got this secret that nobody else knows, that she was able to essentially kill her husband in secret in her mind, and then no one would know about it, and that kind of fuels this whole fantasy of control and grandiosity and entitlement. And so the reason why KOURI Richins isn't grieving is because there's no conditions to grieve.
Right. She's waiting. Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's an extraordinary thing to see because it's a strong suggestion. If there's doubts about whether she murdered her husband, I think to me this is sort of the final straw. I mean, we know about the fentanyl. There's so many. We know about the money. There's so many. But if you look at the grief process, this is not normal. And to me, this is her tell. She's telling us, I'm not grieving because I killed him. And when you kill someone, you don't miss them. You don't want them around. Right? And that's what's going on. And so I think that's what's hidden here. It's subtle, but it's hidden. And I don't know, it's probably not factual enough for the prosecution to use something like that. But from a psychological standpoint, she's telling us multiple times that she doesn't understand grief and she's not grieving her husband and she's not doing that because she doesn't miss him.
Yeah. Kate Marlowe just shared that Larry Woodcock said, I just want one more. Hey, Papa, please, God, just one more. And a lot of people in the chat right now sharing their stories of grief and heartache. I can feel it. It's palpable. It makes me emotional reading your stories. I never felt that, from KOURI.
Yeah. And right. And so I can't see those comments, but I agree. Like the one commonality that I've experienced with grief is you'll do anything just to have the person that's gone come back.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to embrace them and be with them and spend time with them for just one more time, 1 hour. And
right.
with KOURI Richins, she doesn't care at all. She's completely indifferent. She's like, he's gone, well, maybe someday I'll grieve. No biggie, right? Like, and that also, by the way, speaks to, I think the most difficult part of grief is that we all have what I call mental maps of the world. And on our mental maps, we have our loved ones and we give them a large place on the mental map. And so if a loved one happens to pass away unexpectedly, that creates a lot of problems in terms of our ability to make sense of the world because we're used to someone being there all the time and now they're not. And so we have to readjust our mental maps. We have to reform our mental maps in a way that helps us make sense of the world. And it's a profound change, right? Because the person we relied on day after day is not there. And so for most of us, for normal people, it takes some real effort and sorrow and struggle and pain to start adjusting our mental maps because the person we love the most all of a sudden is gone and we have to reconfigure our sense of the world. But, and this gets to a narcissist or KOURI Richins or somebody like KOURI Richins, let's say, that people that are more narcissistic, the people on their mental maps didn't mean that much anyway. So it doesn't take that much reconfiguring because people, for many narcissists, people are seen as objects. People are seen as pawns to be manipulated. And so the mental map of a narcissist, you won't see narcissists grieve as much because the people in their world exist for them and they don't have reciprocal relationships. And so it's not unusual to see someone like KOURI Richins or someone who's extremely narcissistic really struggle to grieve because their mental maps are primarily about them anyway. And they don't know how to incorporate other people and other people's emotions and needs and wants. So that's another component of this.
Someone was asking about, she also had a lack of blinking. I just want to point that out. I don't know if that means anything. You've brought it up before though. So
I think I've seen a lot of people do body language analysis of this interview, and I'm a little skeptical. I think you have to look at body language analysis in a larger context. Whether people blink or not isn't going to give us a lot of useful information. Whether they're showing emotion, that's more important. And contradictions between what they're saying and what they're showing, that's important too. So what she's saying is that what she's saying is that she hasn't grieved. What she's showing is that she wrote a book on grief, where she's supposedly an expert on grief. She's not an expert on grief because she can't grieve herself.
Right. Which, by the way, Annalise asked, and it's a question I have here as well. It was on our YouTube. Why did she write a book on grief? You would think that she wouldn't want attention on herself right now. Why did she not only write a book on grief, but ask to appear on Good Things Utah to promote it?
Well, there's a couple reasons. So I think she wanted to be on television because she's attention seeking. She probably has some narcissistic features, but I think she's also written this book to normalize grief. She's sending the message that she's a grieving mother, she's a grieving widow, and that she's quite capable of occupying this role. Even though she's not grieving, she's trying to send the message. She's trying to normalize the grief process. And I think there's an element of law enforcement here too. She knows law enforcement is looking. She's trying to send a message to law enforcement. Hey, look, I'm grieving. This is what a normal person does who loses their husband. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to worry about. See, this book shows that I'm grieving. She's trying to normalize it.
Yeah. Any attention? Does she want the attention too?
Yeah, right. That's an important part of this. I think the whole process of writing this book and promoting it's very attention seeking.
I mean, let's throw this out. She knew she was being investigated. The public didn't know, but she was writing emails to police, to law enforcement, and doing interviews with detectives, and knowing that Eric Richins' family was suspicious of her. She knew all this during this time that she wanted to come appear as a grieving mother and share this book that a ghostwriter, a book that she didn't write, you know? Ozzy Tad says she thinks that she thought the book would make it appear she was grieving, as you point out, but it is, I think this is the most bizarre thing about this case. In fact, can I read a comment from a gem that they left on our community post? I just think it's really important. She said, this is a comment that Chelsea Whitaker left, not a question, but she said, with everything we have learned, I find KOURI to be quite bland and literally unremarkable. Perhaps the only interesting or remarkable thing about her is the children's book she wrote after allegedly killing her husband. Being a murderer sets her apart from other people, but writing a children's book about grief after the fact sets her apart even from other murderers. She will always be remembered for this atrocious detail, but remembered nonetheless. I would love to hear your take on this, which is what we're doing. Thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah.
But I agree with that. That's what makes her, she is an unremarkable person, and this sets her apart.
It really does make this story bizarre and interesting. And I mean, that's why we're talking about it. I think if she doesn't write this book, we're probably not delving into this case. I mean, it does, the more we dig into this, the more, bizarre it gets every minute. But let's talk about the book. So the book essentially the book's title is Are You With Me? And I've read the book. We don't have the book, by the way, but we've read it. The first half of the book is...
We tried to get it. We weren't going to pay $1,200 on eBay, but we tried.
But we've seen it.
We've read it. Yeah.
So the first half of the book is a series of pictures of a young male child. He is supposed to be a composite of their three children, their three boys. And it presents a series of scenarios where the child's at school and the child is saying, this is my first day of school. I'm feeling afraid. Will you be with me? the child he's opening Christmas presents and he's saying, I have no one to, or, you're not here with me when I'm opening the Christmas presents. Will you be with me? So this question is repeated during the first half of the book. Are you with me? And then the second half of the book essentially is Eric entering the picture and telling the child, I'm with you in all of these occasions. I'm with you when you're afraid. I'm with you when you're happy. I'm with you when you score a goal in soccer. So the question, are you with me, where the child is portrayed, it's actually quite sad. The child is in tears quite a bit. And
It's a very sad book.
There's something very profoundly sad about the first half of the book, because it portrays a child that's extremely lonely and detached from the world, and a child that's really grieving. And the second half of the book tries to solve that dilemma by presenting the father who has wings. They present him as an angel, and Eric is consoling the child and saying, yes, I'm with you in all these situations, so don't worry, I'm with you. Now, again, it took me a minute to digest this book, but there was something about the book that really bothered me, and it finally struck me what it was, and that is that I think this whole book is really very much an avoidance of grief. So the book purports to be about helping a child deal with grief, but the reality is it's about an avoidance of grief. And the reason why that's true is because this angel Eric is omnipresent. He's everywhere. So in many ways, the book is sending the message that if somebody dies, they're going to be present with you all the time, 24/7. So it's almost as if she's painting a portrait of grief here where the person doesn't die. The person is actually with you all the time, which is peculiar. If you're dealing with grief, you have to deal with loss.
Right.
And this book is the opposite of loss. This book is about an angel that's with you all the time, 24/7 for the rest of your life. And don't worry about it. He'll be there. And if you're feeling alone or sad or whatever, Eric the angel will show up and he's always there. And she's really minimizing,
right,
and avoiding his death and the fact that children have to deal with loss and grief. Because the solution to this issue of all these emotions that a child experiences from grief is to picture your father being there all the time. In fact, the irony is that when Eric is deceased, he's more present and more available to the child than when he's alive.
Right. He's there at everything. He doesn't miss a game now. Yeah.
He never misses a game. He doesn't miss like the reality is that I'm sure Eric was busy he owned a business. I'm sure he couldn't be there for some of the children's activities, but when he's deceased, he's always there. Again, I think this is indicative for KOURI. I think this book is a function of her guilty conscience. I do think she has some guilt, and she's trying to minimize or even sugarcoat his departure, his death, through this book, which essentially is a complete avoidance of grief, because it shows someone who's really not deceased in many ways. It's not that he's alive, but he's just there. He's always there, present.
Right. Janine writes, and I love Janine, your comments, but she writes, there's a line that even says, I'll give you my love when you succeed. Yuck. I think it was reference to the stalker game, but right. Good point. That's odd too, on a whole other level, not necessarily grief, but just parenting, only...
Yeah, I have some of the, yeah, this is these are some lines from Eric from the book. These are direct lines. Yes, I am with you when you are feeling sad. I am wiping away the hurt, holding you in my arms and telling you I love you. I am here with you. I am here with you every day, every minute, every second. Again, this is Eric the angel. Although you cannot see me, I am there. It's me in the wind. I'm the chill you feel. It's me, the feeling as if someone is with you. So this notion of being there every day, every minute, every second that's not grief. Grief is about processing loss. And I'm not saying that I think a book like this could potentially provide comfort in the sense that it's important for a child to retain memories of, in this case, a deceased father. I think that's very important. And those memories should be internalized. Those memories can be used in a very positive way. But I think it's sending the wrong message when you have this idea that there's really no loss and that someone's there every second, because that's not real. And that's not really going to help a child cope with loss. So I think one important function of this book, and again, this is a book that KOURI wrote or had help writing, it was ghostwritten, but one function of this book is to really minimize what happened.
Right.
It's to appease her guilty conscience in the sense that if she portrays him as really being there still and still being alive, especially for the children, then she doesn't have to feel as much guilt.
Right.
And I think that goes hand in hand with this idea that she hasn't grieved.
Right.
She hasn't grieved because she doesn't miss him. And now she's writing this book in an attempt to kind of sugarcoat the whole thing and say, look, yeah, he might be dead, but it's no big deal. He's with you. It's as if he's alive. That's the message she's kind of sending. It
really is to get rid of their emotions. If they're crying and they're weeping and they miss him, oh, he's here. He's here. Don't worry. Don't worry.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And
not only that,
one thing, I want to say this. It's one thing to cling to the religious notion that I know, growing up, that I believe my grandfather, who passed away at age 9, might, be watching over me occasionally, or a guardian angel of sorts. But this is different. Yeah, nobody was telling me when I cried because I missed him and I wanted one more hug to get over it. He's right here. He's right here. That's different. It's not allowing grief.
Right, exactly. The line I read about I am wiping away the hurt. I don't, again, like,
yeah.
I think a child needs to experience some hurt and some pain. I mean, not excessively, not to the point of clinical depression, but part of grieving is going through the sorrow and the pain and the hurt of losing someone. And as I said earlier, even for a child, it's trying to reconfigure that mental map of the world so that the person you're used to seeing every day, in this case, their dad, is not there every day. And this book is presenting this picture, this false picture of the dad being there every day, of the dad, literally waiting in the wings or putting on his angel gear and, flying around and being in the kids' lives. And so there's something not only unrealistic about it, especially in terms of dealing with grief, but I think there's a real avoidance here of the main issues. And the reason why there's an avoidance is because the mother, KOURI, not only is incapable of grieving, but she doesn't want to deal with it. She doesn't want to deal with the situation she created. Let's call it, she doesn't want to deal with the alleged murder of her husband.
Right. She's not dealing with it. The kids can't deal with it. Everything has to be good. They're moving forward. Yes. With life insurance policies.
Yeah. Right. So that's my take. I think the book and the interview and the email are both in some ways her telling us what she did.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they're a reflection of a guilty conscience, and they're a reflection of the fact that she's telling us why she's not grieving. She's telling us, 1, she can't grieve, and 2, she's telling us why.
Yeah. Yeah. And, something with narcissism too, someone that's narcissistic, they think they're smarter than everyone else. I can't help but see a bit of that in KOURI too. She thinks she's going to get away with this. She thinks this is no big deal. She thinks that someone said, wouldn't she not want attention? a lot of people might not. They think, lay low. And she's like, no, I'm going to make sure everyone sees me pretending to grieve. Is there a bit of that too? I'm the smartest one in the room. I've got this.
Oh, for sure. Because so in the references I mentioned earlier about poisoning and poisoners, the main components of making a case against a poisoner are proving that the poisoner had access to the substance, to the poison. And then that's one part. That's the first prong. The second prong then is showing that the poisoner administered the poison. So we know from the probable cause statement that she had access. She was dealing with a drug dealer who gave her fentanyl. We know she possessed fentanyl. We know that she gave him Moscow Mule, and we know that within a couple of hours after that, he was dead of fentanyl poisoning. So whatever that chain of causation that law enforcement is trying to prove, in terms of poisoning cases, this is actually really simple. This is like, most poisoners are a little more cunning and a little more stealthy than this. She's leaving a trail that leads directly to her.
The next book should be titled "What to Do When Mommy Murders Daddy," Karen said. Sorry.
Well,
yeah, it's terrible.
Along those lines, by the way, I kept people that know me know I love Shakespeare. I kept waiting for Eric to transform into a scene from Hamlet where King Hamlet is talking to his son, Prince Hamlet, and basically says to him, look, I was murdered. I think his line is, he tells Prince Hamlet, his son, that it was a murder most foul, strange, and unnatural. And he basically says to Hamlet, you need to get revenge for what happened here because I was murdered. So I kept waiting for a moment where the angel wings would fall off of Eric and he would tell the little child, you need to avenge my murder. Because, ghosts show up in Shakespeare when there's a secret, and there's a big secret, and they often show up when there's some need for justice and revenge. And so, if this book were honest, you'd have the ghost or the angel say to the child, this is not natural.
Right.
You need to avenge my death because, right? But instead you get this happy-go-lucky angel who just bounces around and everything's fine. The reality is, of course, that this should be a story about revenge, and it should be a story about a massive secret that's not being told in the book.
Right. A lot of people have been wanting us to just bring up, and I know we need to conclude soon, but a lot of people have been wanting us to bring up the prenup. Judy, thank you so much for your generosity. And Janine asks, I want both of your opinions on that prenup. So many questions. The family's involvement, presenting it on the wedding day, the stipulation that KOURI would get no portion of Eric's earnings or assets gained during the marriage. Yet he wanted a traditional stay-at-home wife and mother. Any thoughts on that? Just that is a request of our listeners tonight. So I wanted to, it's the only thing we haven't covered when I look at all of the questions we have.
So I think we're still gathering some information about family issues and the prenup, and I think we're, at least for me, I'm still kind of in the fact-finding stage with that. But
right, a little premature right now.
It seems to me that there might be a family dynamic here where she's perceived as being a bit of an outsider by the Richins family, and I think the prenup is probably a part of that. And it's probably a part of, by the way, it's probably a part of her anger and this sense of independence she's trying to convey in her email, that she feels like she doesn't really fit into this family. And certainly one way of exacting revenge against a family that she feels rejected by would be to murder the son.
Right.
And take his money, right? Because part of the money is family money. So I think all of those could play into motive a little bit here.
Agree. I want to share something I was texting with one of our gems, if anybody wonders what I was doing, because I do want to share something. But first off, John, do you see that comment there by Kate? I thought that was a great one on the screen. Perhaps she was enjoying the sympathy. When she told the host that her husband had died, leaving 3 sons, she paused as if waiting to receive the, oh, poor thing. There's a little bit of, it reminds me of Munchausen, this attention, wanting attention for being a widow too, or this, oh, how sad. She clearly wasn't getting that from his family, right? And then people in her inner circle might have been suspicious of her. I mean, maybe she needed a bit of that too.
She's, for someone who can't grieve, she's clearly playing the role of the grief-stricken widow mother, right? She's definitely trying to step into that role, and she's painting this portrait. She's creating this public persona that fits with someone who should be grieving for this type of loss. So I agree. Yes, there's definitely an attention-seeking component. She does want sympathy, for sure. And I think that was another one of the motives for writing this book. People say she wrote the book for financial gain, but I don't see that as, I think that might have been a little bit of the motivation, but first-time authors don't make that much money, number one. Secondly, I don't think that's the primary motive for writing this book. I really think this book is a function of her guilt, which, by the way, as an aside, I know I'm going to get this question, but people can experience guilt and not remorse. So remorse is a deeper level than guilt. Remorse is
okay.
Remorse is an admission that you did something wrong. It's more definitive than guilt. Guilt, you can have guilt when you have some pangs of conscience. Guilt is more of a concern that maybe you did something wrong. That your conscience is it's about behavior. It's about your conscience is being tweaked a little bit. But I think if KOURI Richins has guilt, by the way, it's not because she murdered him. It's because she got caught. It's because she didn't take the right steps to avoid detection. The research on poisoning talks about staging, that poisoners are big into staging the scene. And I don't think KOURI Richins really thought about that much. She did a little bit in the sense that she gave Eric the drink of poison, and then she went to one of her son's bedrooms who was supposedly having nightmares. So she wasn't actually there when he died. So she staged it a little bit. She staged it a little bit in the sense that she left the room. It gave her a little bit, a semi-alibi, not a great one, obviously, because she said she gave him a drink, but there was a little bit of staging. I think that really stealthy and smart poisoners do more staging, and she, I think the narcissism gets in the way here, or narcissistic traits, that she feels like she can get away with this because nobody's going to look that closely. And, she didn't anticipate that law enforcement are looking at the death of a 39-year-old who's in perfect health, which is obviously, that in and of itself is going to raise red flags. I guess you didn't think that.
Yeah. I have one more question before we do that, and we'll conclude, and I'll let you conclude, John. We always say that Hidden True Crime is an amazing community. We love our hidden gems. John and I have had a lot of documents to go through when it comes to the KOURI Richins case. We have received documents from multiple sources. Again, I shared that we're going to be sharing a lot of those documents soon on our Facebook page, facebook.com/hidden true crime. One hidden gem in particular is a victim's advocate herself. Her name is Laura Ferris. She collected a lot of documents and did a lot of research. She is from the same area that the Richins are from, so she has an interest, and even financial documents. And I asked her if we could thank her. She said yes. She even was there every day of the Daybell trial in Boise, sitting next to Kay and Larry Woodcock, being a victim's advocate for them. She said that we could, but she wanted me to share something. She wanted me to share a link today to the Utah Crimes Victims Legal Clinic that promotes and advances crime victims' constitutional, statutory, and civil rights in the criminal justice system through victim-centered legal advocacy, education, and resource sharing. I'm going to post the link right now. She can share a little bit more. Allegedly, they have lost some funding, as far as I know. Here is the link. This is who Laura does a lot of work for. And again, this case that we're talking about is in Utah. So I just posted it there if anybody is interested in learning more. And Laura, feel free to speak up in chat. I know you're here with us tonight if there's anything else you want to say to those in chat tonight. But we want to thank you, and we are always thanking those that help us as we gather all of our information. And thank you to others as well. She's not the only one. Others have asked to remain anonymous and not be shared. So we respect whatever people want. So thank you for considering sharing all of your research with us. John, she made her second appearance in court. We have that on our YouTube channel. It was quick. It was 6 minutes, really. A total of 12 minutes camera, but really the entire hearing, it was a status hearing. It was scheduling. She appeared for her second time in court for 6 minutes. It was kind of a nothing burger, I'd say. Yet the most interesting thing about it was her crying throughout the entire thing. Right. I loved what you said, by the way, that there's a difference between remorse and guilt. That she could feel some guilt, but remorse is an entirely different thing. I love that. Yeah. Why would she? Some people think they're crocodile tears. Some people think it's fake. Whatever it was, it looked like she was crying. It looked like there were tears. Why would she be crying in court?
I think, unlike Lori Daybell, I think that for KOURI Richins, this is becoming real. And I think she's starting to come to the realization that perhaps she could spend the rest of her life in prison, that she'll never see her children again. And so I think the reality of this is starting to creep in a way that it never did for Lori Daybell. It might never for Lori Daybell, by the way. But
I don't know. I don't think it will.
Yeah. And so I think that reality is starting to hit her. And I do think there's some guilt. I think, unlike Lori Daybell, I don't think Lori Daybell struggled with guilt at all. And so poisoners typically have no remorse. I don't think she has a lot of remorse. I think she believes what she did was fine, that she deserved his wealth or whatever. But guilt, that's a different issue. I think that maybe she might be experiencing a little bit of guilt. She might be starting to fully understand the ramifications of her behaviors and how life in prison is not something that she probably bargained for. And there's probably some guilt here about being caught. Less so about killing someone and more so about she got caught.
Yeah. And not just caught. Yeah, as you point out, the reality, she probably thought she was going to be able to get out on bond. And there is no bail. Yeah, there's no bond. She's there.
It's and getting on that issue, by the way, this whole thing about life insurance on the kids, it's frightening.
It is frightening.
Getting the dose of fentanyl 5 days after her husband is deceased, and then life insurance policies on the kids, it really makes me wonder if this was moving towards filicide.
Yeah.
That if she envisioned a future without her kids, if she envisioned a future where she was, in her mind, where she could be completely free of all obligations, her husband and her kids just walk off into the sunset. I think it's quite possible that that's where she was heading with this. And by the way, Amy Richins said that in the first hearing. Amy Richins said, "Do not let her go. Right. She is frightening, and she will do this again, and she may well have."
And one scary way to do that, she would take those kids on vacation out of the country. She was taking those kids out of vacation, out of the country, to ocean, places with an ocean. She could easily say an accident happened, something happened. It is scary.
Right. Or she had fentanyl. She could have administered smaller doses of fentanyl that would have been lethal. I mean, there's so many ways, but who takes out life insurance policies on their children?
Yeah, there's no.
I don't know. It's peculiar.
Right. It is. It is. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Cece, thank you for sharing the merchandise. You've helped so much with the designs and the discount codes. And I saw one that said that there's a new discount code coming back up today. It sounds like by popular demand that discount code, I assume it's going to be GEM10. So thank you for sharing that in chat again. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the subscribes. Dr. John, any final words before we end?
Do you have any really interesting, pressing questions? If not, I think we're good.
I think we're good. Next week, what do we plan to cover, John, Dr. John?
Well, the plan right now is to get back on Kohberger and get some updates and see where that case is currently.
We have been following it. Exciting news for those of us interested in the case that there will at this moment be cameras in the courtroom. And John and I have discussed this case a lot, and there's something we want to bring up and discuss in detail that we don't feel many have been talking about enough when it comes to Brian Kohberger. So next week, that is our plan.
Well, there's actually a few really important issues with Kohberger that have not been talked about. So yes, we want to get back on that case and talk about some important elements of the case that have been overlooked.
Yes. Thank you again. Thank you to those who have congratulated us on our 100,000 subscribers and our third birthday. The greatest birthday gift you could give us is to share our podcast as well as our YouTube channel with your friends. That is the greatest way to give back. Thank you for doing that. And then for those of you that are interested, it's been fun to have a lot of our overseas gems with us during the day because I know many are working. But I am replaying we are replaying the original podcast series in celebration of our birthday, the podcast season that started it all. Dr. John, babe, you're so good. It's so good. It's so nice to revisit so many things that you it's really interesting to look at because it's about the Lori and Chad Daybell case. And we did not have FOIA documents. We had not talked to any of the victims or people involved when we started this. And it is very impressive and chilling in many ways what you got right. So we're listening to that at noon Pacific live every weekday. So come and join us there. That's 3 o'clock Eastern time. So thank you to those. And 12 p.m. in Brisbane, I'm hearing. So, right now it is Sunday afternoon in Brisbane right now and 3:11 in the UK. Well, thank you, Mr. Mann, for being here at 3:11. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a great community. I'm so grateful for our gems and our community and all the support and kindness and help and assistance. And yeah, this is really, looking at the 3-year anniversary, this has really grown into something wonderful. And even on this particular case, Richins, we had a little over a week to prepare, and we received so much help and so much support and so many documents. I mean, I couldn't possibly get through all of them. I'm still in the process of going through a lot of them. I picked out what I felt were the most important elements, but we can't do it without our community, and we're just so grateful to our community. So thank you guys.
Yeah. And Tad reminded me we have book club this Wednesday. For those of you on Patreon and in Dr. Babe's book club, right? That's Wednesday night, John?
Oh yeah. So right. We have a meeting this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific time, US. We'll be talking about our first movie. So the book club is actually now a movie followed by a book, followed by a movie. So we have a movie, 2 weeks, then a book, then 2 weeks movie, 2 weeks book. So we alternate between a movie and a book, but we will be discussing the classic movie, The Silence of the Lambs, which came out in 1991, but really kind of changed the landscape of crime, or at least movies about crime. And to me, it's still a really amazing movie. It still holds up after, I don't know how, 25 years, 30 years, 30 years.
Longer than that, I think, because I watched it almost 30, 20,
30,
I don't know.
32 years. It came out 32 years
Wow.
ago. It's one of only 3 movies to ever receive an Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay. So it ran the table for a lot of academies. And anyway, we'll be talking about Silence of the Lambs and Clarice and Hannibal Lecter and
Oh, goody.
serial killers.
I'll try to be there.
On
So
Wednesday.
for those that are interested in joining the book club, book/movie club with Dr. Babe, Dr. Babe's book club, head to patreon.com/hidden true crime. All right. I think we're really ending now. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week to talk all things Kohberger. Thanks, everyone. And for our book club members, John will see you on Wednesday
night. Yep.
And I'll see you guys every weekday next week as we stream our original podcast series. We'll see you guys.
All right. Good night.
Good night.